My name is Dr. Stephen Jones. As an organizational psychologist and executive coach, I love to study what allows people to bring out the best in themselves and others. So join me as I welcome top leaders to uncover the future of leadership. Welcome to the LeaderSHYFT Secret, where top leaders reveal insights earned, wisdom gained, and transformational moments that have defined and redefined their leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Jones, and today's guest is a leader who believes that lasting change comes not from isolated brilliance, but from collective curiosity, caring, and connection. A leader who's bringing bold vision and compassionate leadership to some of the San Diego region's most complex challenges. Mr. Grant Oliphant.
Dr. Jones, it is such a joy to be with you. I think we should stop the interview right now,
there,
because I like the introduction.
Very good, very good. Well, we'll go on a little longer. Okay. Grant is the president and CEO of the Prebys Foundation. Grant is passionately leading Prebys' mission to create an inclusive, equitable, and dynamic future for all San Diegans. In this episode, Grant and I will strive to uncover a few secrets of the future of effective leadership. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about Grant. Born and raised in Adelaide, Australia, Grant grew up in Denver, Colorado.
Correct.
In 2022, Grant became the president and CEO of the Prebys Foundation, the largest independent private foundation in San Diego County, with assets exceeding $1 billion and annual grant making these days surpassing about $75 million. He leads Prebys' work in partnership with the community to advance the region through arts and culture, medical research, healthcare, and youth development to achieve that mission to create an inclusive and equitable and dynamic future for all San Diegans. Grant is devoted to community and philanthropic leadership at the intersection of business, nonprofits, and universities. He has been identified as one of the top 500 influential leaders in San Diego by the San Diego Business Journal. After graduating from that's a mouthful. Swarthmore College.
We should have quit while we were.
I know. Grant majored in history and dabbled in a short-lived political magazine in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Yes?
Well, more than dabbled. We published for 3 years.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a little more than dabbled.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Grant has spent nearly 3 decades working in philanthropy in Pennsylvania at both the Heinz Endowment and the public community-based Pittsburgh Foundation. Grant serves on the board of the San Diego Economic Development Corporation. He and his amazing wife, Aradna,
My much better half.
reside in California and are the parents of 3 sons and 1 daughter. As a leader, Grant believes that lasting change comes from cooperation and collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
A podcaster himself, Grant hosted the Heinz Endowment's We Can Be podcast, which focused on intimate, candid conversations about the big issues of the day with some of the most accomplished, caring, and action-oriented individuals in the social change arena. Here in San Diego, Grant currently co-hosts the Prebys Foundation's Stop and Talk, Prebys Director of Communication, the amazing Crystal Page.
The amazing Crystal Page. Yeah.
And in their podcast, Grant and Crystal lead thought-provoking conversations with local leaders, change makers, and community builders who are passionate about creating that more inclusive, purposeful, and opportunity-rich San Diego. Grant, thank you so much for being a guest on
Stephen, it is such a joy to be with you.
Thank
it really
you.
is.
Thank you. So, Grant, let's talk about your passion for leadership and making an impact.
Yeah. Well, So for me, what I'm really passionate about is agency. And it's, that's the question of how people know that they can make a difference in the world. And, if we are feeling like we're successful, purposeful human beings, it comes from a sense that we're influencing the world around us in a way that is consistent with what we hope will happen.
Yes.
And I think leadership is fundamental to a rewarding life. It takes a lot of different forms, and we're going to talk about that. But really what it comes down to is, how do I make the difference that I want to make?
Wow. Talk a little bit more about that agency, because I'm hearing that as I can make an impact, I can make a difference, my actions matter.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more.
Well, if you, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because we're living in an era where I think people feel disempowered.
Yes.
And, the scale of challenges is so epic and have been presented to us as so epic. And now we're seeing a resurgence in the public realm of the idea that only great imperial leaders and powers can have influence over society or politics or people, and that maybe the really big issues that many of us care about are too complicated to solve, all of which is nonsense. But it's what comes up in periods of complexity, and it springs in part from telling ourselves that we just aren't big enough to make a difference. And the truth is, all of human history teaches us that the only unit that matters in terms of making a difference is what you and I and millions of other people individually think we're capable of, and how we turn that into collective action.
Yes. That's so good, because so many places, organizational systems are set up to say, don't think, just do.
Yeah.
Right? Communities are set up to say, just eat, sleep, wake up, do the repeat.
Right.
Right? Versus making an impact and talk a little.
Well, it's one of the things, it's one of the things I actually love about your LeaderSHYFT approach and this podcast, and just generally the approach you take in working with teams. One of the things I know you believe, which I also believe, is that, we used to teach leadership to people we thought were leaders in organizations, and they were designated, they had the title, they had the potential, but they weren't necessarily the leaders in their organization.
That's right. That's right.
They were, again, they might have had the title, but they were not necessarily the people who were really driving the action in terms of their organization's culture, or really driving the action in terms of the strategy their organization was pursuing. So, leadership is exercised at all kinds of levels and in multiple different ways. But I think what we really have to do is reframe how we think about leadership, so that it is about what you as an individual human being can do to influence the outcomes that you want to see come about. And be intentional about that. Because one of the, the flip side of what I just said, and the downside of the everybody is a leader philosophy, is if it's not accompanied by thoughtful intentionality, then it's just chaos.
Yes. Yes. What are kind of 2 to 3 of the skills that you find effective leaders have or have to develop in order to deliver on their own agency or to unlock the agency of others?
This may sound counterintuitive in the age in which we're living, but for me, the top of the list is always listening. I think really effective leaders over the long term are very effective at hearing what people are saying. And sometimes that can take toxic forms, and other times that takes really beautiful and empowering forms. But an effective leader understands that they have to know what other people are thinking and feeling if they hope to lead them. And so I think it's number one for me. The other is the second on my list would be to really understand influence. It has many smarter leadership philosophers than I have observed that being a leader is about having followers.
Yes.
It just ultimately it comes. You can fancy yourself a leader, but if you look behind you and nobody following, then maybe you need to go back to leadership.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Okay. So, how do you have followers? Well, you have followers. The old school way of having followers was I'm their boss. I tell them what to do. Okay, that's in certain societies and structures that works for a while. The far more enduring way of doing this is to influence people to see their hopes and dreams in what you're trying to do, and to convince them that you and they are part of the same enterprise. So for me, listening first, influence second. Probably the third is, and they're all connected, but the third piece is the power of a compelling vision. I think too many people who think about being a leader just think about that first piece. Okay, I heard people.
Yeah.
Or they think about the second piece. Well, I've influenced them. They're there. They're behind me. But they don't think about where they're leading them. And I think it's hard to hold on to fellow travelers for long if you don't have a clear place that you're trying to take them. And so often we see leaders in our society make this mistake where they want to ask people to do hard things. They want to ask people to join hands in a united effort, but they don't really adequately explain why.
Very good. It's so good, right? Because the why is like the fuel, right? It's the what people can link and align themselves to. And so often, to your point, I've seen people as well focus on the what and not the why.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And how do we train leaders to communicate the why and the importance of the why?
Well, you first have to train leaders to ask questions.
Go ahead.
Yes. So, of course, the gold standard for this is Simon Sinek's famous TED Talk about, the five whys. And it's sort of almost become hackneyed at this point, but it is profoundly true that before we ask anybody to do anything, or even ourselves, we should be asking, well, why do I care? Why do I want to do that? Why does it matter to me? Why is that important?
Yes.
And why should I care about even that thing? And when you get to the core, then you have a clear sense of what you're about and what's driving you. And that makes you much more credible in terms of persuading other people to care about that too. Because I think people inherently have a sense of what type of leader they're being led by. And when they're in the presence of an authentic leader, they know that they're being led by someone who is in touch with the thing that motivates them, and that they are generous about sharing that why with them as well. When they're in the presence of a toxic leader, they know that it's simply about serving the needs of that individual, that boss, that person in charge. And so asking the why question in an authentic, genuine way is I think the first piece of training. And then the second, I think, your question, which is how do we encourage leaders to talk about the why more often? I actually am not sure I mean, sometimes that's the problem, and sometimes, in politics, that's never the problem. Somebody's always got 1,000 whys, right? But um, they don't necessarily always think about that why connected to what they've heard from listening to all the people and what they're really feeling.
That's so good.
And the other thing I'd say about this is, when we encourage other leaders to explain their vision, to explain their why, what we're really asking them to do is tell a compelling story about where they want to go and where the world we collectively should want to live in. And again, if leadership is about influence, then if you're not telling a compelling story and you're not painting an impressive picture and you're not bothering to share with people why something really should matter to them, you're not going to be successful, Phil.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, as you tell the story, where do you see the balance between kind of intellectual, data-driven versus affective storytelling?
Yeah. So, this is one of the things I've learned through the hard knock school of life. I was a plus student my whole life, right? And so for me, it was all about the intellect, and then you discover that doesn't matter at all. That the way people make decisions is deeply feeling based, and narratives, what we call narratives or stories, are rooted in a mental map of the world, but it is rooted in a set of feelings that are deep and that have their own weight and their own themes. And so it's the capacity to tap into that, I think, is really hugely important. I can sit here and on any given subject, you and I could engage in a debate about the statistic on an issue, and we would lose your entire audience and nobody would care.
That's right.
But if we started telling stories from our lives about why that thing mattered or how we've seen it affect people in a personal way, suddenly that's real. And so I think that what you called affective storytelling is, which to me is really about tapping into emotion and our human archetypes, is hugely important.
Absolutely. It takes me, Grant, to we spoke a little bit about it, and in preparing for this conversation, I learned that you had I'm going to call it a near-death experience in not getting on a plane and making a different choice that could have taken a very different direction in your life. Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact that has had on who Grant Oliphant is?
Yeah. Well, that was one of those moments when you realize you're not in charge, and that so I was working as press secretary to Senator John Hines and his Washington, D.C. office. And I had decided to accompany him on a statewide trip that he was going to be taking, and during which he would fly in and out of small towns and meet with constituents and do town meetings, town halls, and do interviews with the local media. And since I was the press secretary, it made sense that I should do one of these with him. And I, at the last minute, decided not to take this particular trip because I was a young dad and I had a little boy at home, and my heart just told me to stay at home and be with him. And on that flight, or on that trip, John Hines was killed in a crash between the charter plane that he was on and a helicopter that came to check out why they were having problems with their landing gear. And horrible tragedy. Multiple people died in the air and on the ground. But it was, this was a man I deeply admired. I was a young guy who, I viewed him as a mentor and a boss, and my employer. So, hardest working guy I think I'd ever met, and totally dedicated to making a difference. And so, I realized a few things in that moment. One was that we're not in charge in the way that we think we are. But there was also just this, some things hit me that, I've lost this person who was an inspiration to me. I have lost this person who I regarded as a mentor. I've lost this work that gave me such a sense of relevance and satisfaction. And you never know how you're going to react to those things. But for me, what it did was entrench in me this idea of how I wanted to make my way in life, which was to work on issues that mattered and to be engaged in a way that, was relevant to the things I cared about in the world. My very next job, because I needed a job, was to go work in corporate America, and I hated it. It just wasn't, it wasn't for me. It lacked those things. But I then had the opportunity when Teresa Hines came knocking a couple of years later to rethink that decision and start working for her and in the field of philanthropy. It was near death it was one of those moments where life could have taken a very ugly, different turn. And I'm deeply grateful that it didn't. I'm also mindful that is life, how it works. And I'm also grateful that it opened my eyes to the work I wanted to do and the way in which I could do it.
So good. Agency comes to mind,
right,
as you talked about earlier, right? And the importance of that.
Yeah, and agency doesn't, by the way, mean we're always in charge. This is one of or in control. This is one of the mistakes people make about leadership. Leadership is the worst assignment for a control freak because good leadership does not mean being in control of everything. Actually, good leadership is about letting go often, and you learn that.
Could you say that again? One more time. I think there are some folks who need to hear that, and there are some folks who will want other folks to hear that.
Deeply true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about having to learn that lesson, right, the hard way around the idea of, somebody said, the more powerful I become, the more powerful I become, the more powerless I realize and kind of come to grips with, if you will. So that idea of control is really not essential, if you will.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you do. It is one of the humbling lessons as you get older, that you are in control of far less than you imagine you are. And period. It doesn't matter where you sit on the org chart, and it doesn't matter how much control you presumably have in your role. You don't control what people think when they go home. You don't control what they think when they're at work. You don't get to control all the variables and the events that life throws at us. And so part of the art of leadership is holding all of that much more loosely, I think, and creating the circumstances for the system to succeed, and for the collective to succeed, as opposed to just you individually.
Yeah. Grant, I'm thinking about complex, complicated change, unprecedented change and leading through those challenges, what would you say is 1 to 2, 2 to 3 mindsets, skill sets, behaviors when leaders are faced with leading either complex, complicated challenges and change or complex and unprecedented situations?
Yeah. Well, in addition to, I would point back to the points we've discussed already around listening in particular, because I think in complex change environments, listening becomes particularly important, and paying attention to changes in context is none of us like change. Let's be honest.
That's right.
Human beings are naturally averse to it. So paying attention to it and understanding that we might have to is one. I think another piece of this that we haven't talked about, and that this was also an important lesson for me, is to understand that leadership in moments like that is still also about power. And, power is a word that many of us struggle with sometimes, because, we don't want to be the toxic leader who just thinks about power. But if you are in a leadership position, you also have to exercise power. And that means to exert influence in a willful way, and to urge people to look at a situation differently than they might naturally want to. And to challenge the status quo and the conventional easy ways of thinking about things. There's this wonderful apocryphal quote. It's not true apparently, but it's so true. It ought to be true.
Okay.
Attributed to Henry Ford, that if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And what's beautiful about that sentiment is, when you're reinventing a situation, this goes back to the vision point we were making earlier. When you're reinventing something, which is what complex change requires us to do, you have to be willing to step outside of all the neat little lines that have existed up until that point and offer something completely radically different. So that's also about power. You have to be willing to exert your influence around something that may feel uncomfortable or uneasy for a lot of folks. The other thing I think that comes up in that is you have to be, you have to at the same time be able to come back to people with a very clear story about why it matters to them. If you think about where we are right now, maybe the easiest way to answer this is to think about where we are in the world at the moment and in this country. So we have deep historical issues that no matter who is in charge and wants to wish them away, we're on a journey to being a true multicultural, multi-ethnic, multiracial functioning democracy.
That's right.
And that's been the story of America since we started, and it's complicated, and we have moments where we progress and moments where we step back.
That's right.
So that's one of our complexities. And then we've got a complexity around climate change, which, whether you believe in the science or not, the world's getting hotter, and it's changing the way crops grow and the insects and diseases that we're exposed to, and where the water is, and life's going to be different. So we are now, just taking those two examples, we can either tell ourselves stories about how broken we are, how incapable we are of reacting in time, that, or we could tell ourselves that's never been the story, it's the wrong story, and the true story is that we're perfect.
Yes.
We just need to be more perfect. We're human beings. People go back and forth on these things. The job of the real leader is to hold all of that and to say, and we're still on this path, and we're still going to be able to make it if we lean into really fixing these things that we are refusing to address. And that becomes harder, I think, as you get older and more fixed in your ideas and your ways. It's harder on our young people today because they've been fed so many stories about how really damaged everything is. But what leaders today need to be leaning into is we are the hope that we are looking for, and we can fix this. And to keep conveying that message.
Yeah. So it reminds me, what you're saying reminds me of this idea we oftentimes say part of the challenge of diversity of thought challenges leaders to hold two opposing viewpoints.
Yes.
Without invalidating one or the other.
Right.
But the ability to learn from the multiple viewpoints and perspectives, especially in those complex situations that you presented. Yeah. And
I, in my work, have been heavily influenced by Buddhist thought. And in Buddhism, there is this notion that the binary is false. And, that we are all connected in ways that we can, and all thought is connected in ways that we can hardly see sometimes or appreciate, but we know in our hearts that it is true. And I look at the tribalism and the animosity and the division that exists in America today, and I want to fully acknowledge and say with conviction that there are principles and values that people, of course, must defend and stand up for and be clear about, and not feel like they have to compromise on those because they have to get to some wishy-washy middle. But the idea that a person who thinks differently than I is my enemy is a very dangerous idea. And the idea that I cannot sit down with them and talk and have a conversation and respect where they might be coming from is a very dangerous idea for the country that we want to be and for the world that we say we want to build. So, I think this is a type of leadership that ultimately the world is going to have to master. I really believe that because we are 10 billion or on our way to being 10 billion people on the planet. We are connected in crazy ways. And right now, we're watching this resurgence of hyper nationalism and, this sense of building walls and creating divisions. It's been ever thus. We'll go through this. But on the other side, the truth is still going to be that we are a hyper-connected people on a hyper-connected planet, and our only means of survival is to figure out the leadership that works in that context. And that leadership will encourage collaboration and connection and cohesion and not division and enmity.
Very good. You're answering a question that's in my head, which is I'm thinking about how does the leader recognize when they're veering into that, what you've mentioned a couple of times, toxic leadership, right? I think about it a lot of like, they say, how do you boil a frog, right? So if you leave it sitting in lukewarm water.
How does the toxic leader know he's a toxic
leader? Yes.
He doesn't.
Exactly. So what are some of those flags, and I think you just shared the divisive instead of collaborative, right? What are some of the,
I think this is actually a great question for all of us, because anybody who's ever been in a leadership position has made mistakes.
That's right.
And one of the mistakes that they have made is probably flirting with being toxic in ways they didn't see, right? So, for me, if it does require some reflection, so you have to have the capacity to reflect, but assuming that if you find yourself asserting authority based on position, more than occasionally,
Yes.
every so now and then you'll encounter circumstances where you just kind of have to just assert yourself, and I understand that. But if you're doing it based on, hey, I'm the boss and this is what I say, like the old joke about my mom and I said so.
Yes.
Then that's a flag.
Yeah.
I think if you're thinking about how your organization and culture serve you, more than you're thinking about how you serve your organization and your culture, that's a red flag.
Very good.
And I think if you're thinking about people as widgets and functions, and silos, then that's a red flag. The best culture I've ever had with an organization is right now in San Diego with the Prebys Foundation and the folks I'm getting to work with. And we have a group of people who are allowed to show up, to bring their best selves and everything they're capable of into the workplace, and they look out for each other. And if you're in an environment where everybody is out for themselves, that's a red flag.
Very good. Very good. And I know the intentionality you have as the CEO of the Prebys Foundation put into creating and sustaining that environment and that culture where folks can show up and be their authentic selves.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been, thank you. That's been a really important value for us. We have wanted to create a workforce and an environment that really captures the best of what this community is about. And actually, I think so far it's going pretty well.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. I also think about, you mentioned reflection, right? And I think about, I heard someone say, if agreement is the currency for inclusion, one, I would call that a flag, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's agree with the leader in order to be heard or considered, right? But I'm also thinking about the complex situations of climate change and, multiculturalism, and the idea of, we'd like to say leaders have a responsibility to make decisions, including information and perspectives they disagree with, right? Because if they're only including information,
correct,
right, then to me that's another red flag. Would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And again, one I've been as prone to as anybody else. I think echo chambers are everywhere, and echo chambers are very comfortable, because they don't challenge you. But you brought up inclusion, so let's talk for a moment about DEI and equity and inclusion in the workplace as an example of that. I passionately believe in creating a more equitable society. I believe that we have to acknowledge the ways in which we don't currently have that, so that we can fix it, so that we can make it better.
Yes.
I also think people who think like that, like I do, have often in the past made a huge mistake in the assumptions we make and the way in which we talk about it. So when it becomes about acronyms.
Yes.
And when we just assume that everybody understands what we mean, and when we make one set of people feel irrelevant or wrong so we can make another group of people feel relevant and right, we are just sowing the seeds of the next set of problems. And we are not actually being true to creating an equitable and inclusive workforce or workplace. And so and you and I've spent a lot of time talking about this, but if we want the best America and we want the best organizations, then we want to be able to get everybody engaged and the best people engaged.
Yes.
And that means every race, every ethnicity, across genders, across difference of all kinds. And we want that group to feel comfortable and engaged and able to work with each other and respectful of each other. We want that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the country we're striving for. But I think sometimes we've forgotten how to talk about that. We've made it about acronyms. And do you agree with me on this issue? And do you see it exactly the way I do at this point in time? When what we really need to be doing is talking about fundamental values. I know when I arrived at Prebys, Framde and Crystal, the amazing Crystal Page you mentioned earlier, we talked early on that the way we were going to talk about issues was in plain language.
Yes.
And we use plain language. We don't use, to the extent that we can. And we don't use acronyms as shorthand. And my team and I talk all the time about let's avoid jargon because philanthropy loves jargon. And we want to make everything a specialty. So and the mistake that the trap we fall into is we start assuming people either know what we mean.
That's right.
Or they darn well should. And you know what? Making the person you're trying to persuade of something wrong, not a good strategy.
Yes. It reminds me, I was doing some coaching with this director of diversity, and I like to use math as an analogy, right? And he was talking in calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And telling folks why they're doing Algebra 1, right? And I said to him, are you skilling them up to calculus? Telling them they don't know calculus does not help them
get to calculus.
Right? Yeah. And so that idea of really working to say, 4 words come to mind. I saw this speaker once. He says, these are powerful 4 words. What does that mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like when the shortcuts, the acronyms, but we also have to talk about power when we talk about leveling the playing field, right? Where there are times where the standards have been based on one group. And so the norm and what success looks like, what leadership looks like, looks from a particular cultural lens or gender lens or, sexual orientation lens. And so many people don't even realize that what they view as objective leadership or objective success actually has a cultural filter to it, right? So there's some unlearning that has to happen in that process. What do you think?
Well, I think one of the easiest ways to make this point is to talk about health as an example. We fund in the area of health, but I think right now the anti-woke wave is that everything should be everything for everyone, right? And of course, that's the societal goal, right? That's we want that society.
Yes.
If I talk to you about the standard of fitness in human health through almost the entirety of modern Western medical history, the standard of fitness was a young 18-year-old military male.
Yes. Yes.
And so if you're going to take that as your standard for all of health,
Yes.
what aren't you going to learn?
Yes.
Well, you're not going to study women's health.
That's right.
You're not going to look at pediatric health. You're not going to look at diseases affecting the elderly.
Yes.
You're certainly not going to look at diseases that affect racial or ethnic minorities or groups beyond that, because, of course, we were also talking about a white military.
That's right.
If you want a complete picture of human health and you really want to improve overall human health, you start looking at, okay, well, we need to actually pay attention to health as it affects certain populations. We just have to, because otherwise we don't have a complete picture of human health. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, as it turns out, one of the most effective ways to do that is now you have to think about who's doing the research and providing the care. And not surprisingly, why were young white 18-year-olds, males, the standard? Well, it was because the doctors were slightly older white males. And so when you diversify the medical and research professional core, they ask different questions. They ask a more complete set of questions. So where we quickly come out to is, if you want the best healthcare in the United States of America, you study everybody, and you make sure that there are the people in place to do that.
That's right.
Now, you don't call it something that is easily dismissed, but I think every American can probably understand,
that's right.
Oh, if I want to be a healthy person and get the benefit of the best medicine in the world, I want that health care, not what we used to have.
That's right. What do leaders need to avoid?
Oh, my God. What do leaders need to avoid?
Yes.
Well, I think that we need to avoid the trap of thinking that we're the hero of every story, which is a temptation. Really, some of the best leadership moments for me have been when I can point to something I've inspired, or the way in which I've put together a group or a process has led to a really fantastic outcome.
Yeah.
My fingerprints aren't necessarily all over it. And that, you learn, I think, as a leader, not only to be okay with that, but to celebrate that, because it means that you're making room for others to be leaders. And so, the opposite is that you have to pretend that everything is thanks to you. And that's self-serving. It doesn't help groups and companies and collectives. So that's one, I think. And then I think the flip side of that is that we have to avoid the trap of hiding, and I think you've talked about this before, but that it really is possible for people to wear the mantle of leadership and to have all the trimmings and really be managers rather than leaders. A leader is trying to get people to go somewhere different than you, and a manager is figuring out how to make that happen. So, to go back to our earlier conversation, the leaders in the why business and the manager in the business. I just think that, not getting sucked into that trap is important.
Absolutely. I heard an analogy of a good manager is in the forest, chopping the trees, clearing the path, making sure that the people behind them can move smoothly and clearly.
Yeah.
The leader is climbing the tree to make sure they're in the right forest.
I love that. Not sure about the cutting down the trees analogy because I'm a little more of an environmentalist, but I take your point, and it's a good one.
Let's just say clearing the path, not cutting the trees.
Right.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
Good clarification. Yes. I'm thinking also, Grant, about part of what I have seen, and I'd love to get your take on, is leaders who reach the C-suite and executive levels and the skills that are important to deploy when you find yourself in the role of leader of leaders, whether it's working in a community collaboration, whether it's on a board, whether it's, executive level leadership. What do you find that's important to shift when going from frontline supervisor, middle manager to that C-suite executive level?
This is a great question, and again, it goes back to having clarity of vision, being able to listen, being able to develop a leadership group as opposed to just follow the leader, and I think so. One skill is cultivating how to cultivate an effective leadership team.
Yes,
and we think a lot about teams, but we tend to think about teams in most organizations as there's a team leader and then there are followers. And it's not the way teams work. And so when you're in the C-suite, I think part of the task is figuring out, okay, what does a genuine leadership team look like? How do we make sure that we're collectively effective? Because a good leader will understand that every other leader around them is a force multiplier for them, and an extension of what they hope will happen.
yes.
So that's one. The other, we talked about this earlier, is having the willingness to delegate and let go and sit loosely in the saddle when it comes to authority and control.
Yes.
Because any other leader around you who is worth their salt is not going to sit around being micromanaged for long.
Yes.
If they're any good, they're gone.
Yes.
And so that's, I think, hugely important. I actually had a third answer, but it's escaped me. Well, those are, I think those are really important.
Very good. Well, let me add another to support your third, which is, I think, understanding the right questions to ask about the work versus doing the work,
right?
Which is oftentimes how leaders get to that level.
That's right.
Right. But then in order to delegate, but then to be able to ask critical questions at critical moments in the process.
I love that. I wish that had been my third. It wasn't. I'm going to pretend that it was.
Let's do that.
No, I love that because I know that, again, when I think about my more successful moments, it has part of what I'm doing is asking questions. And when I've experienced really good leaders in my past, we talked about John Hines earlier.
Yes.
I worked for his widow, Teresa Hines, for a big chunk of my career.
Right.
What both of them were exceptional at doing was asking tough questions. And even, when they fully, it was clear they fully trusted their teams, but they asked some of the toughest questions that I've ever been asked. And it wasn't in a spirit of let me find out where you don't know something, but in a spirit of do you know what you think you know, and are you sure, and have we accounted for everything? So asking really good questions is a really important piece.
I also think about what you just said around trust, right? And what does trust look like when you're in that C-suite, right? I think it looks different than when you're the frontline supervisor,
Right.
right? And so that idea of how do we unpack even what does a trusting C-suite leader, how do they move? How do they function?
Yeah.
How do they develop that trust in themselves and others?
Yeah. This is a question that applies to life and not just to being in a C-suite, right?
Yes.
I think people know when you're in alignment with who you say you are.
Yeah.
And I think part of being a good leader of leaders is that you're in alignment with who you say you are. You behave in ways that are consistent with what you say is important. You articulate what you think is important. And I think you're also honest. Now, one of the things I've been told is that I'm really good at delivering bad news to people.
Very good.
I don't know if that's true or why, but I what I love about that is I always believe when I'm talking with colleagues and people who are asking me for advice in sharing with them what I genuinely see.
Yeah.
But to do it in a way that is constructive and positive and affirming for who they are and what I see in them. So I think there is a candor that is coupled with a kindness, which is too often missing right now from what we see in the public dialogue. Good feedback helps you see where you can improve. It also helps you believe in your capacity to do that and makes you want to do it.
That's good.
When I've gotten good feedback before, some of which that I didn't even realize was feedback at the time. But when I reflect on it, it was so expertly wrapped in an affirming sense of who I was and what I could be that, of course, I wanted to get better at that thing, So, yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah. Again, I go back to helping others increase and unlock their agency.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
that leader who's able to, and we did some work with Toyota where we talked with managers about feedback and coaching.
Mhm.
And we talked a lot about coaching picks up where feedback stops.
Mhm.
Because feedback is about the past.
Right.
Coaching is about the future.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that, and great coaches make you believe and see things in yourself that
Yeah.
you don't see yet. Right.
Well, and partly what you're drawing out is that a good leader of leaders
Yes.
is a coach. And this is, again, something that you appreciate as you get older.
Yes.
I know when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have felt comfortable with that idea. And, I know when I was younger in my leadership journey, I simply wanted to be acknowledged as what I was and to exert my authority and for that to win the day, right? And then you get a little older and you realize, okay, this is not what leadership is about. But then as you get further along the journey, you really do realize that a big chunk of it is about coaching other people to be their best leaders.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. We're coming to the end, but I don't want to leave without learning from you and hearing some of the lessons you've learned from some transformational work that you have done both in Pittsburgh and that you are doing in San Diego as you are shifting culture and at scale, right? What are, and I'm going to ask it in two ways, a couple of skills, and I know we've talked about a number of them already, that you would say when leaders have that charge and that challenge, right, to say we've got to transform a county, a community, a country, if you will, right? What's the additional lens there around skills, but also around belief in yourself?
Yeah, well, they're I'm going to answer in a way that suggests they're connected.
You got it.
So, I what I have learned is that people are always capable of more than they believe they are or than they have been told that they are. And, I've seen this in multiple circumstances. I saw it in Pittsburgh and I've seen it in San Diego. We see it nationally often. We tell ourselves stories or we are told stories that are self-limiting stories. So, that you can only go so far, you can only do so much, you're only capable of this or that or the other thing. And I have always found that people are capable of far more than those stories lead them to believe. The second thing is that I think, and this comes to your question about leaders. So leaders first have to see that in other people, but then second of all, they have to figure out, okay, well, what unlocks that? And what unlocks that is paradoxically making it seem harder. I did an interview with Erwin Jacobs recently at our Waves Festival, and he had an answer to a question I thought was, his answer was brilliant. But he just, he said in one very succinct moment, he found that his employees liked to be challenged to do hard things and then allowed to figure them out. So often when we're encountering challenges in a community or a country, what we want to do is dumb down the problem and make it seem, well, we can't aspire for that big thing because we got this problem now, so we should take what we can get and we'll worry about being great later. The opposite is actually true. If you challenge people and say, well, actually, the situation is way bigger than you think it is. Yeah. But if we do this, this, and this, we could beat this thing. Suddenly it becomes people rise to the occasion. If you think about why hope rises in context of it happened during the Blitz and studies of people in the Blitz in London. It happened during the pandemic. Why was San Diego a leader during COVID? It's because a really big, horrible thing was happening, and that inspired people to believe that they could find the solution. And a good leader will connect the dots and say, we can figure this out, and you are the way that we will do it.
That's so good. That's so good. It is clear to me, and probably to you at this point, that Grant and I could go on for a while.
Oh, we could, yeah. We could do that.
But we could do that thing. We can't do that thing. Yes, we could. But I can't believe that in the blink of this eye, our hour has come to an end.
I know. This is like one of our dinners.
It is like one of our dinners. We'll bring a camera next time we have dinner, right? But it has truly been a lesson in leadership. Grant, I really, really appreciate your perspective, your lens, your authenticity. And I can understand why you communicate bad news effectively. So I'm going to really encourage you. One, let me say thank you for staying tuned in, for listening, engaging, watching. Really, really appreciate it. We are committed at the LeaderSHYFT Secret to continue to bring you top-notch, high-performing, high-quality human beings in leadership roles, like my friend Grant Oliphant.
Well,
so we'll ask you to subscribe, like, and share the LeaderSHYFT Secret Podcast. Grant, I want to say thank you again for this great conversation.
Stephen, thank you. I've really enjoyed it, as I always do when we talk.
You got it. Yeah. Very good. Y'all stay tuned. Come on back. Bye now.